What starts as a fun night around the campfire quickly turns into a spine-chilling nightmare. When Jaka mysteriously vanishes during a rafting trip, the friends are left to confront terrifying truths in the haunted woods. For friends, Bima, Reno, Dika, and Jaka decided to camp by a river deep in a forest known for its eerie legends and mysterious tales. That night, they sat around a flickering campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. The night sky was filled with stars, but the silhouettes of the trees around them created a haunting atmosphere. After hours of laughter, they began to spook each other with ghost stories. The sounds of the forest subtly changed, and the rustling leaves seemed to whisper ominously. Reno, who had been visibly uneasy, refused to sleep on the edge of the tent. His eyes frequently darted to the dark woods beyond. "I don't want to sleep on the edge. Let me sleep in the middle," he said, his voice trembling. Sensing Reno's fear, Jaka smirked mischievously. In a raspy voice he whispered, "If I die first, I'll come back to haunt whoever sleeps in the middle." Their laughter abruptly ended when a sudden gust of wind blew, extinguishing part of the campfire. Shadows around them seemed to move on their own. The next day, they decided to try rafting. The river seemed calm on the surface, but its current was turbulent. As their raft glided along, a thin mist began to descend, giving the river an eerie aura. Suddenly, the current intensified. Rocks appeared out of the mist, causing them to panic. The raft capsized, and in the chaos, Bima, Reno, and Dika struggled to swim to the shore. Their breaths were ragged, their bodies shaking from the cold water and fear. Jaka, however, was nowhere to be seen. They called out Jaka's name, their voices echoing through the trees. The forest replied with an unsettling silence. "Maybe he's already back at the tent," Bima suggested, trying to calm himself despite the uncertainty etched on his face. Night fell quicker than usual, as if the sun was reluctant to illuminate the forest any longer. They returned to the tent, hoping Jaka would be there, but the tent was empty and the campfire had gone out completely. The atmosphere grew more sinister. "I feel like something's watching us," Reno whispered. Dika and Bima exchanged glances, feeling the same eerie sensation. When it came time to sleep, Reno once again refused to sleep in the middle. "What Jaka said last night, it doesn't feel right," he muttered. They agreed to sleep in a circular formation, back to back, so no one would feel alone. In the middle of the night, footsteps approached. Leaves crunched underfoot, and twigs snapped, sounding unnervingly close. The tent flap slowly opened. Jaka appeared with a pale face and empty eyes. His clothes were soaked, mud clinging to his body. "I got lost," he said in a monotone voice devoid of emotion. Silence enveloped them. "We've been worried about you," Bima said, forcing a smile despite his rigid body. "Come inside, so you can rest." But as Jaka entered, a strong smell of decay filled the air, and the temperature inside the tent dropped drastically. Their breaths turned into white mist. Reno stared at Jaka with a look of terror. "You're soaked, Jaka. What happened?" Dika asked. Jaka turned slowly, his empty eyes meeting Dika's. "The river, it's deep," he replied briefly before turning away and lying down stiffly. That night felt endless. Every second dragged on like hours. Bima, Reno, and Dika couldn't close their eyes, their ears picking up every little sound outside the tent. The night grew later. Reno woke up because he needed to use the restroom. As he exited the tent, he saw Bima sitting by the campfire, smoking. Without saying much, Reno walked towards the bushes. Not long after, Jaka also followed Reno towards the riverbank. Suddenly, a scream echoed from Reno. Bima quickly ran over, asking what had happened. With a pale face and trembling hands, Reno pointed towards the water. Lying by the riverbank was a lifeless body with a familiar face. It was Jaka. Their breaths became heavy, and their hearts raced. As they tried to comprehend the reality, a voice from behind made them freeze. What happened? Jaka stood behind them with a blank expression. "Nothing, we're done here. Let's go back," Bima stammered. The two of them quickly ran back to the tent, waking up Dika, who was still asleep. Panicking, they explained that Jaka was dead. But before Dika could fully grasp the situation, Jaka was already standing outside the tent. The three of them panicked and immediately ran into the forest. Their breaths were labored, and their feet stumbled over roots protruding from the wet ground. Jaka silently chased them, his empty gaze becoming more terrifying. Occasionally, they heard his footsteps getting closer, or his breath suddenly heard behind their ears. They scattered, trying to evade him, but no matter which direction they ran, they always ended up back at the same place. Reno tripped and fell. As he tried to get up, his hand touched something cold and hard. He turned and screamed at the top of his lungs. It was his own body. His eyes were wide open, his body stiff, and a wound gaped open on his forehead. Bima and Dika, who approached, saw the same thing, their own bodies lying by the riverbank. Jaka, now standing not far from them, began to speak. "At first, I didn't realize I was dead," he said hoarsely. Then Jaka began to recount the moment he realized he was dead. When Reno and Bima found his body by the riverbank, Jaka accidentally found it too. He walked closer, wanting to make sure what he saw wasn't just an illusion. As his gaze fell on the stiff body lying on the ground, something inside him shattered. But what shocked him even more was the fact that it wasn't just his body there, but also the bodies of Reno, Bima, and Dika. He stepped back, looking at his pale hands, touching his own chest that no longer beat. Jaka returned to the tent, shouting his friends' names one by one, but they ran away in fear. They looked at each other, and for the first time, their fear turned into resignation. They cried, lamenting a fate that couldn't be changed. In the silent night, under the pale moonlight, they finally accepted the reality that they were dead. There was nothing left to do but wait for a dawn that would never come for them.